Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Everyday Anarchism, the show about how anarchism, non domination, cooperation, mutual aid is found in your everyday life. It's been so hard since I've recorded that intro that I don't remember exactly how it goes. But hello, anyways, I'm your host, Graham Culbertson. You're about to hear an interview with my guest, Micah, about the book of Genesis, which is really exciting. But before you get to that, I wanted to tell you about a couple of podcast appearances I made recently. I appeared on Micah's podcast, The Word in Black and Red, to talk about part of the book of Exodus, which I really enjoyed doing. And I also, gasp, appeared on the Skeptical Leftist podcast. And the reason why I'm gasping is because that podcast, the Skeptical Leftist podcast, records video and is on YouTube. And if you want to see what I look like while I'm talking about anarchism, this is your chance. I don't recommend it. I would keep purely an auditory relationship to everyday anarchism if I were you, but I'm not you. You do you. The music, which you're about to hear, is by David Hill. And I will have links to both of those podcasts in the show notes. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Everyday Anarchism. And hello, Micah. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Well, sort of a first-time caller, because you and I recorded an episode of your podcast that I think as we're recording maybe hasn't come out yet, but I'm sure what is coming out soon and probably will be out before this releases. Mm-hmm. So we'll talk about that in a second. But first, Micah, tell us who you are, what you're up to, and I guess go ahead and introduce the podcast that I appeared on as well.
Yeah. So my name's Micah. I was raised as a fundamentalist in a Christian tradition that thought that the Southern Baptist Convention was too liberal, and so, being raised in that very conservative setting, I was raised to think that you had to take the Bible literally and all of these sort of things, and I wasn't allowed to engage in anything that had magic or really any non-white cultures, to be frank. So no Pokemon, no Disney, none of that stuff. I grew up with the Bible as my main mythical frame of reference and understanding. And so my best friend and I still talk about it as we speak Bible as our first language. And I really started to read the Bible for my own in high school. They started sending me I was homeschooled until high school, and then they started sending me to a secular high school so that it would be my quote unquote mission field where I would, convert all those dirty heathens. And, and I began reading the Bible for myself and came to realize as I read just verse after verse about caring for the poor and taking care of immigrants and what justice is supposed to look like, over and over and over again, over 2,400 times in the Bible, where the most common verse is nothing about salvation, nothing about getting to heaven, nothing like that. It is care for the stranger, for you were once strangers in a strange land. And as I read those words, I was just completely transformed and put into this position where I could either believe in the fundamentalist religion that I was raised with or love the God of the Bible and the God who is love. And, I'm not here to convert anyone. I'm not interested in doing any sort of that. My God saves everybody. So I think we'll all be in heaven together, regardless of whether or not you agree with me. And, and so I'm not, not interested in converts or anything, but I am here to say that there is profound work that needs to be done in our society if we want to actually get to the kind of society that cares for people in the way that the Bible has always been pointing us to. And it is not going to require just religious people to get us there. It's going to require all of us who care about building a world where everyone belongs, where people are not stuck under the oppression of capitalism and these hierarchies that get in our way and cause all of this damage to us. And so, as I was reading the Bible and continued to dive in and explore and look, I eventually left the fundamentalist tradition and was adopted by the progressive Baptist tradition. And it's a much longer story. I'm now an Episcopalian, but the Baptists sent me off to seminary. And on my way to seminary, I began to, again, read these words over and over and over again and recognize that if I really believed that God is the fundamental reality of the universe, then all of our other attempts to have hierarchy, like kings and presidents and capitalism, are all idols that get in the way of our connection with God. And that led me to the tradition of Christian anarchism, which is really rooted in Jesus's teachings on the Beatitudes, this idea that violence is the way that the world works, but violence is not meant to be the way that the people of faith are supposed to work, that God has interrupted the violence of this world by surrendering to violence and then defeating violence not by killing violence, but by dying and coming back to life. And even if you don't believe in Christianity, even if you don't believe in the resurrection, that's a pretty fucking good story, you know? And so Christian anarchism really kind of came out of that. And as I began to become a Christian anarchist, all of this scripture through that I have been reading all of my life came to light and came to life in all of these new and beautiful ways as I began to realize that, you know, the capitalist way that I was raised to read the Bible has nothing to do with what the Bible actually has to say. And in fact, that there are these undercurrents that completely undermine any sort of justification for capitalism that are woven into these books in a really meaningful way.
Okay, that's fantastic. Now you just got to say how you took all those insights and turned them into a podcast.
Yeah. So I began to realize this and recognize that the church that I was running online for queer kids and leftists and people who were left on the outside, people who had been raised like me to be a fundamentalist, and now were trying to figure out how to love themselves and hopefully love God at the other end. But you know, I've helped people realize that they're atheists and make that faith transition. But you know, again, we don't have an agenda. My God is big enough to love you, whether or not you love God, and 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 so we began having our community began to grow and grow and grow. And we got to the point where we had people in almost every time zone, and we were trying to host these Bible studies. And we couldn't get the people in Germany to meet with the people in Philippines, to meet with the people in the United States. And so we started having an asynchronous podcast Bible study. And that's launched The Word in Black and Red, where we read the Bible from a leftist and liberationist perspective to illuminate the way that the Bible can be used as a source of healing, love, and liberation for all people. That this story is one that was written by an oppressed people who are trying to imagine how their God continues to love them and guide them into a better way of living. And so when you read the Bible, not as, you know, we are the victors, we are here in the imperial core, and this is meant to apply to us because we are God's chosen people, but instead we recognize, well, are we the bad guys? You know? How is this being used against us? And when you begin to read it that way, when you strip away all the capitalist bullshit that lays on top of most American Christian interpretations of the scripture, you begin to dive much deeper into what this text actually means and the way that it can liberate us if we dare to learn lessons and wrestle with and disagree with and love and hate what the Bible has to say.
Yeah, awesome. That's fantastic. I mean, I've got tons of stuff to say in response to that. We do want to get to this reading that we've talked about doing, but I mean, just a few things. The first thing to say is, if you are not a Christian, if you were not raised Christian, let's say, or indeed, I take that back. If you were raised Christian, or if you weren't raised Christian, but if you didn't spend a lot of time reading the Bible, the sense of Christianity, and I don't mean the hypocritical Christianity of, you know, gods and guns and killing in the name of Jesus. I don't mean how it exists like sociologically in America, but I just mean this story that the devil is a big player in the Bible. If you know anything about the Bible, you know that the devil is like, it's this Manichaean struggle between the Bible and Jesus. And I just am here to tell you that that's not true. The devil barely
Mhm.
appears in the Bible. He's mostly like in the book of Revelation, which most scholars think shouldn't probably even be part of the Bible. And then we've got this 2,000-year-old tradition now of finding various places where various ideas or negative adversaries are in the Bible and being like, oh yeah, that's the devil. There's this character called the devil,
Mhm.
and he's in the whole Bible, and we've always got to be. They're always smiting him in there, and it's like, you can read the Bible cover to cover and not notice the devil is in there, and
Yeah.
that's because he's not really.
Mhm.
This story of this titanic struggle between goodness and dark that leads to the necessity of all this smiting, that comes from the field of theology.
Yeah.
It does not come from reading the actual book itself.
Yeah.
And that's just hard to understand if you haven't read the book.
Yeah. Well, and it's fascinating that you say that because, Satan, the word Satan just means adversary. And so
Yeah.
like in the book of Job, it's like prosecutor, and
Yeah.
ACAB includes prosecutors. So Satan is a bastard, but Satan in the Old Testament is part of God's counsel. And in fact, when Balaam, who's the prophet who goes off to curse Israel, and then his talking donkey stops him from getting his head cut off by an angel, uh, God says to Balaam, I will be Hasatan to you. I will be Satan to you. I will be your adversary if you try to curse these people. And so, like, Satan is, even in the New Testament, like, when our friend Josiah, who's on the podcast quite often, who I think might have been on the episode that you were on, had brought this insight to me a little while ago, that like the temptations of Christ, the place where Satan is most active anywhere in the Bible is when he's whispering in Jesus's ear, hey, you could do all these sort of things. The temptations of Christ are the temptations of Rome. They're the temptations of taking worldly authority like the Romans had. And so, it is literally the temptation to be a king here on earth that anarchism is so opposed against. And if you refuse to take that power, what can you actually do instead? And how can you revolutionize things instead? So, yeah, just Satan is not an interesting character. It's much more interesting to talk about like the ways that the things that we're afraid of become monsters in our minds, like death, like sin, and we try to get away from those things. Well, I should say, like death, and to try and avoid and get away from death, we end up crushing under other people beneath us, and killing them, and we call that in the Christian tradition sin. And and then we do things like build capitalism so that we can try to survive and defy death in some way, but we can't. And the Christian message is not that we can defeat death, but that actually, if you believe that God died and came back to life and that we get to live forever after this, death becomes a friend. Death becomes the person who's standing there at the gate and lets you in to this next part of life. And this next part of life that is not far away up in the clouds, a life that is here on the earth that will continue after this. This idea that, Christianity is all about the hereafter completely misunderstands what heaven is supposed to look like and what eternal life is supposed to look like. It is a deeply materialist existence and material existence. That's why God took on a human body to prove that we are meant to live in this good created world that we can together make a whole lot better.
Yeah, I mean, that all sounds great to me. And I guess just the last thing I want to say before we move on is, I mean, I imagine if you've been listening to this podcast for a long time, you're not surprised to hear the idea that Christianity is compatible with anarchism. Although, of course, Christianity is incompatible with anarchism if you're using the definition of Christianity that you will hear,
Mhm.
that you'll hear in Rome, I should say. And by Rome, I don't mean the Roman Catholic Church, but I mean the metaphorical Rome,
Yeah.
the seat of empire. Um, and there are certainly I think there are people who are skeptical of the whole tradition of Christian anarchism within the anarchist movement, and I understand why that is. But I mean, I'm I'm not one of them. I mean, in my reading of the set of ideas known as anarchism, most even of the greatest expressions of them, from Gerard Winstanley, from Ralph Waldo Emerson, from Tolstoy, come from people who are engaging with Christianity. Many of the greatest, most anti-anarchist things that have ever happened have come from people who are engaging with Christianity.
Yeah.
So it's not, and this is one of the challenges of the word Christian can mean anarchist and it can mean monarchist. I'm with you. I think a true Christianity is anarchist.
Yeah.
And I think a true anarchism is, I wouldn't say Christian, but I would say a true anarchism is certainly compatible with the teachings of Christ. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it's a pleasure to have this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you know, I would say it's Christian, not like as an exclusionary way of saying it's not other things too, right? But true anarchism is Christ-like. It is the surrendering of power in order to build something better for all of us. And that so much is what the church is meant to be. And let's talk very bluntly here, the church has not been that for 2,000 years. You know, we have majorly fucked up constantly. And also, if you read the Bible, that's exactly what you should expect from people who are trying to be the people of God, is that we will fuck it up, and we will fuck it up in royal ways that hurt people and cause systemic oppression and all of these sort of things, because we're human beings. And human beings, from the way that the Bible talks about us, are things capable of immense beauty and also immense tragedy. So much tragedy that we saw love itself embodied in a human being, and we thought, yeah, we got to kill that guy. Got to get rid of that.
Yeah, so this is the perfect segue into the way I wanted to introduce our larger topic. So there's a literary scholar named Northrop Frye who has just written amazing stuff on the Bible, and he describes the Bible as having a U-shaped narrative, which it has this U-shaped narrative in the really big picture. Things start off really great, really up high with Adam and Eve in the garden, and then things, are at the lowest of the low when Christ is crucified. But then there's the arc back up with the second coming. But of course, you can do this same you can do this U in Christ's life. You can do this, the smaller U when Christ is born, and then it goes down again for 3 days. This is reading Frye utterly convinced me this is the arc of the Bible. There is the time when things are good. There is the fall. Of course, there's the capital F fall, but there's the lowercase f fall over and over and over again.
Absolutely.
Then there's the redemption, and that redemption, you know what? It's coming. It's coming after that redemption.
Yeah.
Is that goddamn fall every time.
Absolutely.
So so I tell my students, like, it's not the U shape of history, it's like the sine wave of history. It's like, just like the fall over and over again.
Yeah. Well, and Walter Wink, one of my favorite theologians, it describes a very similar pattern where he says that everything is always in a process of being good, of being fallen, and in the process of redemption. The trouble is that most of the time we're all complicated enough beings that I might be good on issue A and I might be fallen on issue B, and I am both things at once and trying to get into redemption on both of them, right? And the story of the Bible is also, absolutely a sine wave of, oh, we're good with God, oh, not good with God anymore, and back and forth all the time.
Yeah, and so in some ways, it's almost better when you're reading the Bible when things are really bad, because they're going to get better for
Absolutely.
Israel. Whereas when things are really good for Israel, you're just like, oh my God, what is
Yep,
coming?
yep,
It's
yep.
not something so bad is coming. Like if
The-
you're like, oh, this Jesus guy is great. This
yeah.
story's so great. I really hope things turn out well.
Yeah.
It's like, oh Jesus.
The other sandal is about to drop.
Yeah, it does. Oh, it does over and over again. And I'm just so intrigued by your reading of this as being like, earthly wealth, prosperity itself,
Mhm.
as it's the thing that starts this drop. So
Yeah.
why don't you unveil this idea for the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we finished up our first season, I began to realize this constant pattern that happens throughout Genesis. And it really came to the forefront as we were discussing Joseph, because my contention is that Joseph in Genesis 47 basically sets up everything so that the Pharaoh will enslave his family for the next 400 years. And that's because of this famine, right? If you know anything about the Joseph story, you know that Joseph was maybe I shouldn't even start there. Let me stop there. That Joseph got in charge of Pharaoh's land and basically in charge of Egypt and basically oppressed the people so completely that it brought almost all the people of Egypt directly under Pharaoh's rule. Pharaoh became the most powerful ruler, at least according to this mythology, that had ever lived, who had direct control of all the goods, all the land, and all the people of Egypt as his personal slaves. And then Joseph is like, well, this is a great situation to bring my family into. And they become enslaved. And when I realized that what we thought was a blessing, this great blessing of Joseph's wealth, was actually the worst curse that could possibly befall him, I began to look back and say, oh, actually, every time in Genesis that someone is made wealthy, that splits apart their family and leads to this division and downfall. And so I think that actually we read through the book of Genesis, and the accumulation of wealth is not meant to be seen as a blessing. It's meant to be seen as a sign that you're not trusting God, and therefore is a curse that divides your family.
Wealth is a curse. I mean, another way of putting this is property is theft,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, and if you go back and read those books, the the call is for wealth.
Mhm,
When people are in the desert, when people are in the dark times, when people feel like things have gone wrong for them, what they ask God for is, more sheep,
mhm,
basically.
yeah.
Is like, if we can just like, if I just had, if my fields were only a little more fertile,
Mhm,
things would be okay.
yeah,
And since these are God's chosen people, God grants
mhm,
their wishes. They get the land of milk and honey.
mhm,
Eventually they'll get a king. That's skipping ahead, but
yeah,
they always get what they ask for. They always are delivered this wealth and prosperity, and the result is always the destruction of their way of
yeah,
life, the loss of the children,
yeah.
the immiseration of their entire world.
Yeah, the Bible basically is the Midas touch or the monkey paw. Like God is like, I'll give you what you want, but it's not what you want. I promise. Like,
Yeah. So, I mean, how does this affect our understanding of what we take from the Old Testament once we're reading it in this monkey paw way? Because I mean, I think this is just delightful.
yeah. Well, so let's really ground it in the story before I answer that question, because I think it's a good and deep one. But so we start off with Abraham, and if you are familiar with the Old Testament, particularly with the study of Genesis, Genesis can really be sort of divided into three books. There's the first 11 chapters, which are sort of this ancient mythical story about how the world came to be and the first several thousand years of history and that sort of thing. You get the story of the Garden of Eden, you get the fall, you get the Tower of Babel. That is a metaphor for fascism, which I highly recommend you go listen to our episode about. And then you get the flood. And out of those stories, you end up getting into the second book, which is really the core of Genesis, which is the story of the patriarchs. It's the story of Abram, who becomes Abraham, of his son Isaac, his grandson Jacob, and then the 12 children of Jacob, whose other name is Israel, who will become the mythical ancestors of the people of Israel. And so when we zoom in on Abram, Abram gets called out by God, and God is like, hey, I'm going to give you this land in Canaan. And that's the first thing, basically, that we hear about Abram, is God promising to give him a homeland. And then the first thing that Abram does in response to that is says, cool, I'm leaving this land and I'm going to Egypt. so so Abram goes down to Egypt, and while he's there in Egypt, he basically the first thing that happens when he gets to Egypt is that Pharaoh, who again does not appear to be like the super high up guy yet, he seems like he's just a local tribal leader, and at least in the context of the story, right, in the mythology of the story, and Pharaoh is like, ooh, look, your wife, Abram's wife, Sarai, she's pretty hot. And she is supposed to be like an octogenarian at this point, so so pretty unusual. But let's suspend our disbelief here for a second. And so Pharaoh in Genesis 12:16 gives Abram, and I'm just going to read here: flocks, cattle, male donkeys, men servants, women servants, female donkeys, and camels in exchange for getting his wife. Right, and this ends up bringing down a curse on Pharaoh's household. Now, this story ends up happening 3 different times. Where this time it's in Egypt. The next time it happens to Abraham, it'll happen to the king Abimelech. Where in the Abimelech story, it seems pretty likely that Abimelech is suffering from incontinence, like he can't get it up for Sarai, and that's the curse that is coming down on his head. And then the third time it'll happen to Isaac and his wife. So it's weird. It's weird enough that it happened, but it's really weird that it happened 3 times. But Abram's money really comes from robbing the Pharaoh, because he deceives the Pharaoh about his wife and basically sells her into sex slavery. Let's be abundantly clear here that that's what's happening here, and that's how he makes his money, right? And for a bunch of the rest of Genesis, you will see Abraham retell this story as God has blessed me with all this wealth. Because he doesn't want to admit where his money actually came from, right? Like so many grifters today who got a small loan of $1 million, right? And that's how they made their empire. They don't want to actually admit where their wealth came from. But what's really interesting about the story is that's where his wealth comes from. But then immediately in the next chapter, they have so much wealth that they go back to Canaan, and Abram still at this point, has this nephew Lot. Now, Lot is supposed to be the person who inherits everything from Abram. Like, he is his nearest relative, his closest friend, all these sort of things. But in Genesis 13:6, it says, they had so many possessions between them that the land couldn't support both of them. They could no longer live together. And that word support we talk about in the episode 1.10 of The Word in Black and Red. The word support is literally like the beams that hold up this structure are going to fall apart if you don't get off this thing. Like, you're crushing the earth underneath the weight of all the cattle that you have. And which could be quite literal. There are lots of areas in in the ancient Near East where actually pits could form because sinkholes basically arise a lot. So, interesting physical metaphor of what's happening here. But Lot and Abram, because they have so much wealth, because of Abram selling his wife into sex slavery, they can no longer be together. Their family divides, and Abram and Lot are never reunited again. And what's really particularly damning about this story is that Lot, of course, will go to Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abram tries to save Sodom and Gomorrah from being destroyed, because Sodom and Gomorrah are such wicked, terrible cities that they seem to have stolen everything from Lot. So he goes to Sodom and Gomorrah in order to not have to fight with his uncle about their property, and then seems to get everything stolen from him. And then Sodom and Gomorrah get destroyed. His wife looks back at the city, gets turned into a pillar of salt. He loses his wife, he thinks that it's the end of the world and nothing is going to live ever again. So he gets drunk in a cave, and his daughters decide that they need to get him drunk so that they can have sex with him and have incestuous children with him. And what's the result of that terrible union, that to be frank, rape of their father, is the birth of Moab and Ammon. Moab and Ammon, who become the bitter rivals of the nation of Israel for the rest of the Old Testament. So, like, right here in the opening gambit, the opening bid, we have this person who claims that he got his wealth from God, who actually got it by selling his wife into sex slavery to another king, gets so much from that deal that it separates out his family, and then that family that he has been separated from loses everything and ends up giving birth to the tribe that will become bitter enemies with his family for the rest of time. So, wealth, a great blessing? I don't know.
Yeah, and the only thing I want to add to that is there would be like a conventional left wing reading of this story, but like an anti-biblical reading that's like, see, this is a patriarchal book in which the sex slavery of women is a good thing, and I'm not going to deny that reading is there. There's a lot of currents and cross currents in these texts, and certainly plenty of right-wing Christians have read it that way. But what I find just so delightful about your reading is we don't have to deny that sex slavery is the foundation of the wealth of Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
But we can acknowledge that there's all sorts of horrific, let's say, ungodly consequences to this. We do not have to read it as this is how God has blessed Abraham. This is, in your reading, this is how God has cursed Abraham.
Yeah, absolutely. Because Abraham didn't trust God in the first place with what God had actually given him. So he needs to accumulate so much more than surviving. And we see this happening in the book of Exodus too, right? Where the people are freed from Egypt, they're out in the wilderness, and God says, I will provide you all the manna that you need to eat. And in fact, if you try to get more than you need for a day, it's going to rot and go bad. And if you try to get less than you need in the day, you're still going to have enough. And then on Sabbath, when you're not allowed to work, you'll get the full 2 portions, no matter how much you pick up. And if you try to get more than that, it'll go bad, and you'll only get the 2 portions. And so, like, this idea of scarcity, where we try to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate so that we can trust in ourselves, is entirely anathema to a God who gives us enough and what we need, and in fact more than we need, but that it will be enough for us.
Yeah, I mean, this fits so well to with how in our current world there is more than enough for everyone.
Yeah.
But so many people have more than they need, and a lot of it is, purely, comes from purely bad motives. Let's call it greed.
Yeah.
But plenty of this acquisition comes from the, reasonable belief under capitalism that you could suddenly find yourself cut off from whatever avenue you have to have gotten enough. And so you need to have, it's like if someone offers you $10 million, it would be very unreasonable to say, no, I'm good. I don't need $10 million. What you should say in 2025 in America is like, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
Can you please put this in a trust for me so that if I do get cancer or I'm in a car accident or I lose my job, and like, wait, what? You can't relax unless you have $10 million? But that is the world we have built because we are unwilling to make sure everyone has enough. And these two things are driving one another. If you are unwilling to make sure everyone has enough, then yeah, it becomes a reasonable thing to want millions of dollars, because what is the alternative?
Yeah.
The alternative
absolutely.
is a life of constant fear because you are unwilling to live in a world in which everyone has enough.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. If I have to get mine only by screwing you over, like, then we have created this competition where neither of us can ever have enough.
Yeah.
And And there's a really interesting retelling of this story by our good friend W. Scott McCandless, and on the Retelling the Bible podcast. It's on our feed as episode 110-2 or something like that. But it's if you go to the Retelling the Bible podcast, it's episode 619, where he points out that like it's not just this rivalry between Abram and Lot. It actually ends up cycling down to their workers, and their workers end up hating each other. Like the workers at Pepsi and the workers at Coca-Cola hate each other when in fact it's the bosses that have the rivalry, and there's no reason for us to get our identities so wound up in the rivalry between these two organizations that aren't paying us enough to give a damn. Like
Yeah, I mean, and you'll even see people whose only connection to Apple is that they spend thousands of dollars on Apple things, and yet it seems to be important to them to put opponents of this multi-trillion-dollar company now down. Well, we're definitely not going to get through the entire book of Genesis, but let's keep rolling with what we can get through.
Yeah, well, and this fake rivalry that we just discussing goes directly into, again, another sort of not trusting in the sufficiency of God, and so trying to do it ourselves, and it resulting in disastrous consequences. So God says to Abram, "Hey, like," and this isn't explicit in the text, but if you read the Bible, you pick this up that Abram lost his heir. He's now upset because Lot is gone missing. He's somewhere in a cave. He probably presumes that Lot was killed in Sodom and Gomorrah, so he doesn't have an heir. And so God says to Abram, "Hey, I'm going to give you an heir." And Abram is like, "Yeah, no, I'm 100 years old. My wife is 90. Like this isn't happening." And which is again a perfectly reasonable thing to do under the reality that we're in. But here in Genesis, we are in the mythical reality of God, right? And if we believe into that, then God can do whatever the hell God wants. and so, but Abram instead takes one of his wife's slaves as a wife, Hagar, and Sarah gets so angry. She's Sarai for the first time this happens, and Sarah for the second time. If you're not familiar, Abram and Sarai get their names changed by God to Abraham and Sarah. But the first time, Sarah sends her away because basically Hagar is getting uppity and is like, "Hey, I'm pregnant with my master's child. You're not. You should probably be treating me as an equal." So Sarah sends her away. And then the second time, it's after Sarah has her son Isaac, and Hagar and Sarah gets in this idea that the vast wealth that Abraham has, so much wealth that he couldn't have it with his heir before, and both exist in the same place, this tremendous amount of money and cattle and all of these things, that there wouldn't be enough for both of them. And so Sarah says, "The servant's son won't share the inheritance with my son Isaac," in Genesis 21:10. And in our episode 120 on this, we talk about this myth of scarcity that is there, this idea that somehow that won't be enough for Isaac, that Isaac will want for something. And this sort of like domineering spirit by Sarah ends up completely infantilizing Isaac as a character. You read the rest of Isaac's story, it's 2 chapters basically. Like Abram got about 10 chapters totally to himself, and Isaac gets about 2, and then there's a bunch more on Jacob and all of his sons and all the drama that happens there. But in those stories about Isaac, there are very few verbs where Isaac is not the passive recipient of something else. He is the definition of a fail son, right? He he gets the money from his inheritance. Things just happen to him. He doesn't take an active role in almost anything. The three really big ones where he makes the decision is he chooses to live in Canaan instead of running away to Egypt when another famine hits. He plants a vineyard, and he responds when someone asks him whether Rebecca is his wife or not. When that situation again happens where where just like his mom, a king comes, Abimelech comes and tries to take his wife because she's hot. Isaac says, no, she's not my sister. She's my wife. And so he is just completely passive in these things, which leads to the domination by his mother. And then she dies because, long story short, Isaac is almost sacrificed by Abraham. If you're not familiar with the story, um, God stops him at the last second. And Sarah, upon hearing the news, gets so freaked out she dies, according to the tradition. Isaac is devastated by this, meets his wife Rebecca. This is a rebound relationship, and Rebecca just comes to dominate him entirely. And and Rebecca ends up pregnant with twins. She has the firstborn is Esau, and Esau is the sort of stereotypical man's man. Esau means red, as in ruddy, as in dirty, in the dirt, that sort of thing. And then she has Jacob, and Jacob literally means heel grabber, someone who like an ankle biter, like one of these little dogs that gets put in purses because they're too annoying to have on the ground, and and, and Jacob, the way that ancient wealth would have worked in this time period is that the firstborn, because the firstborn is supposed to take care of mom after dad dies, the firstborn gets a double portion of the inheritance. So if you have two kids, you get 3 portions of them. Firstborn gets 2 portions, secondborn gets 1. You have 7 kids, you divide your inheritance into 8 portions. First kid gets 2, the rest get 1, right? And so like they're born, and then the next story immediately after they're born that just illustrates the ways that they are is that Jacob steals Esau's inheritance. That Esau is coming back from this hunt, and he is, again, this really manly man. He's coming back from this hunt doing what he's quote unquote supposed to be doing as a man. And Jacob, this effeminate figure, is back at the camp cooking with mom. And he cooks this red lentil soup that's supposed to basically be mocking Esau because he's dirty, so he wants something dirty. And Esau is so starving, hungry, he's only thinking through his stomach, and he says, "Give me the soup." And then in Genesis 25:31-32, Jacob says, "Sell me your birthright today." Esau said, "Since I'm going to die anyway, what good is my birthright to me?" And so, like, first off, Esau, very camp, very drama, much wow. But, but Jacob does all this deep manipulation to get the inheritance from his brother. So he already has so much more wealth. And then when Isaac has gone blind, Jacob goes and puts on lamb skins so that it looks like he's hairy like Esau, and puts on all the smelly stuff to make himself smell like Esau. And he goes and gives Isaac basically a deathbed meal, and Isaac gives him the blessing. And this blessing is one where these blessings are supposed to have these really powerful effects. They're magical spells, basically. And like any good D&D wizard, he only has one per long rest, and he's about to long rest forever. So he can't give a blessing to Esau. He gives a much worse blessing to Esau that basically is like, "Yeah, Esau, you're going to serve your brother forever." And so great blessing, Dad. So I'm so thankful. And in 27:35, Isaac said, "Your brother has already come deceitfully and has taken your blessing." And so it's like very clear, this is deceit, this is a lie, this is manipulation. And that ends up making Esau so angry that Esau wants to kill Jacob. And they don't get back together until almost near the end of their life. And they don't get back together well enough because when Jacob and his family eventually go to Egypt to survive the famine, when Joseph is in charge of Egypt, Esau doesn't go with them. Esau stays in the mountains. They stay separated. And the first thing that happens when Israel goes back into the promised land from Egypt is in Numbers 20:14-21, and our episode 4.15 covers this, is that Edom, the kingdom of Esau's descendants, say, "No, you can't go through our land. basically saying, we know what you did to our great great grandpa. Like, y'all already screwed us over. And this again creates an eternal animosity between the Edomites and the Israelites, to the point where Israel will go and conquer Edom a bunch of times and force them to be their slaves. And Edom will eventually rebel, take the land back, and probably help the Babylonians destroy the temple in Jerusalem in retaliation for these evils that have happened. So, like, the worst possible thing could have happened because this wealth, again, divided Esau and Jacob against each other.
Yeah, and this it seems clear to me again that it's that grasping desire for too much that is, I mean, look, in this case, it's literally a blessing, right? Like, it's not a metaphorical blessing; it's a literal blessing, and it is an actual curse. Because when you get enough, or indeed too much, because you grasped for it via competition, because it was a game you wanted to not just win but dominate. The result is not, oh, isn't this nice? Now I have my McMansion. The result is suffering. That's the only result you can get from that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and not just suffering, but eternal rivalry that never stops. Like, if Israel and Edom and the Moabites and the Ammonites had stood together and resisted the conquest that was coming in from the Babylonians, they wouldn't have been conquered. Right? Like, the way that empires work is that they divide people against each other, and then they go pick you off, weakest link by weakest link, until suddenly you're all ruled. That's why a tiny island nation with not that great of a military was able to rule most of the world, because they just divided people against each other. And when those divisions happen and people can't unite, you can't do a Bug's Life. You can't realize that your enemies are much weaker than you are if you come together. And so you completely fall apart.
All right. Well, we're rolling. I got about 15 more minutes. You got, you got a kid in the background. I got kids coming home from school any minute now. I mean, one thing I thought we could talk about is just like parenting and podcasting. It's not easy, but you know what? We're cruising here. So, and you mentioned Joseph already, so maybe we can do this a little faster. Let's knock this thing out with some Joseph.
Yeah. So Joseph is a super interesting character, probably genderqueer, but you got to listen to the Word in Black and Red to learn more about that. But he's clearly the favorite of Jacob. Jacob has 2 wives and then 2 mistresses, through whom he has 12 children. And his favorite wife has Joseph and then eventually Benjamin. But all the kids see that Joseph is the favorite. So, long story short, they throw him in a well, sell him off to slavers. They take him to Egypt. Through shenanigans and trusting in God and shenanigans, he ends up being in this position of being able to interpret a dream for Pharaoh. And Pharaoh has this dream that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's 7 healthy cows, and then 7 skinny cows come and eat those 7 healthy cows. And the way that Joseph interprets it is that there will be 7 good years of harvest, and then there'll be 7 bad years of harvest. So you have to store up wealth in those 7 years of good harvest in order to survive the bad harvest. Now, an interesting thing about famines is that when we look historically at most of the famines that have happened in the last century or so, they've not happened because the environment was bad or anything like that. They've happened because an empire fucked shit up, right? Like the famine that killed millions in India because of British mismanagement was taking food out of India, more food than was necessary to feed all the people, and shipping it out. Exact same thing in Ireland, where the Irish were producing tons of food, way more food than would feed all of them, but the British rulers were taking it all and only allowing them to eat potatoes. And because there wasn't enough, because of the blight, the potatoes ran out. And so millions of Irish people starved and fled Ireland because the empire mismanaged it. In the USSR, there were stupid scientific quote unquote theories that basically that led to wild mismanagement by a central authority rather than allowing people to grow their own way in the traditional methods. And so it led to starvation in Russia and in China. And I don't think it was malicious. I don't think it was nearly as malicious as when the British Empire was doing it, but it still happened because of the way that the empire tried to run these things. So we see that famine on a systemic level tends to happen from these things. And what does Joseph suggest to make sure that there's enough for all of those years? He says, tax the hell out of everyone. Take 20% of what they make, store it up for it. Well, if you're taking 20% on people who are making enough for themselves to live and, maybe a little bit extra to sell on the side, then you're taking up most of the food. You're creating a situation where they don't have enough seeds to plant the next year. And that happens year after year after year after year until suddenly you've created a famine. And so, I think that is a solid way of reading it. You got to listen to our episodes 36 and 40. On those episodes, in the first season to get there. But I just want to read this passage because you see the ways that it comes over and over again. In 47:13, there was no food in the land because the famine was so severe. And I'm skipping down a little bit. I'm not reading the whole thing. I'm just going to skip as we go. Joseph collected all the silver to be found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain, which people came to buy, and he deposited it in Pharaoh's treasury. The silver from the land of Egypt and from the land of Canaan had been spent, and all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes just because the silver is gone?" A good argument. Like, are you going to murder us because we don't have any money? Joseph said, "Give me your livestock, and I will give you food for your livestock if the silver is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food for the horses, flocks, cattle, and donkeys. He got them through that year with food in exchange for all their livestock. So they've given him all the money, and now they've given him every single living animal that lives in Egypt is now direct property of the Pharaoh. No one else has any money. No one else has any livestock.
I mean, talk about like a theory of a unitary executive.
Yeah.
Like that's like seriously.
Absolutely. When that year was over, they came to him the next year and said to him, "We can't hide from my master that the silver is spent and that we've given the livestock to my master. All that's left for my master is our corpses and our farmland. Why should we die before your eyes? We and our farmland too. Buy us and our farms for food, and we and our farms will be under Pharaoh's control. Give us seed so that we can stay alive and not die, and so that our farmland won't become unproductive." Again, a really good fucking argument. Like, if we all die, there's nobody to work this land. It becomes useless. It becomes useless to you. And so Joseph comes to own all of the farmland in Egypt and all of the people in Egypt as well because of this. It goes on to describe the ways that he moves all the people from one end of Egypt to the other. He just gets to do whatever he wants to and manipulates people and all these sort of things. And then in verse 25, the people said, "You've saved our lives. If you wish, we will be Pharaoh's slaves." So Joseph made a law
that's so sweet.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, and the book is and the story's presenting it that way. Of like, what a good job.
Yeah,
like, isn't this so nice? Voluntary slavery because Joseph did such a good job. Sorry, I interrupted, but just
absolutely.
I mean, I've read this story so many times, and I've never read it this way. And Micah, this is thrilling. This is
yeah. And so like Pharaoh goes from being in the story of his grandfather or great grandfather, just the sort of local tribal leader, to becoming the direct owner of everything that exists in the land of Egypt. And only the priest farmland didn't become the Pharaoh, is the final verse there. That everything became directly controlled by Pharaoh, and the only thing that he didn't control is the family of this strange little guy named Joseph, whose ancestors came and lived there. And so the only threat to Egypt's power is Joseph's family. And so Joseph sets up the system by which his family will become enslaved for 400 years. All of this wealth, all of this great blessing that it seems like he's just accumulated, directly leads to the enslavement of his family. And if that is not a fucking curse, I don't know what to tell you. Like,
The blessing is the curse. All right. As far as I'm concerned, you have absolutely crushed this. And so now we just got to go back to that question that I asked a little prematurely. What does this mean? Give us the big picture that we can take with us.
Yeah. Ultimately, what is repeated throughout Scripture over and over again is all the earth belongs to God. And the early church, we had a great episode with Stephen J. Morrison, who, if you haven't had on this podcast, you absolutely should. He wrote a book called All Riches Come from Injustice. And
Nice.
It's talking about the early church and the way that the early church sees our attempts to own things as idolatrous. The idea that we can own something and someone else shouldn't is just flying in the face of God. And if I have two coats and I see someone who needs it and I don't give it to him, I have stolen it from him, because it wasn't my property to have in the first place. It was God's, and by keeping it for myself, I'm stealing from the person who needs it. And that idea is so fundamentally incompatible with anything like capitalism. It completely puts us at odds with this constant need to accumulate and to just take in more things and more things and more things. And that's not to say that we can't have nice things, right? Joseph gets a princess dress from his dad, and that's a great thing that he got to have. That's not the problem. The problem is when we trust in this material reality or this material wealth, this accumulation, this endless need for more, rather than trusting in the God who said that they loved us and in the family and community that were already around us. And you don't need the God component to get this story, the lesson out of the story.
Yeah, and it's when Stanley who says, God says the earth is a common treasury, but you don't need the God part. And if you feel like you do need the God part, then you can use the concept Gaia, which is just a beautiful way of saying the Earth's ecology. And I am I'm far enough away from my Calvinist roots to say that it doesn't matter whether you call it the Earth's ecology or God or Gaia. And I see no fundamental incompatibility from all three of those approaches, and Gaia is such a beautiful one and fits so seamlessly with both of these other traditions that, I mean, what's the harm, as long as you're willing to use a word like Gaia, which of course someone from someone who remained in the faith tradition I was raised in would consider the word Gaia to be idolatry, when it's pretty obvious that it's money that is the idol. Money that is the idol.
And none of this is even to talk about the way that money is considered an idol in Jesus's time, where he won't even touch it anywhere in the Gospels. And you lambasted Revelation at the beginning here, but it's my favorite book of the Bible, in part because the mark of the beast is a coin. It is money. It is idolatry that we are forced to use this thing that has a head on it that we hold in our hand, and it's the only way that we can exchange things. And
I just need to jump in and say I actually really like the Book of Revelation,
okay, cool.
but the insistence on reading the mythology of the Book of Revelation as the key to unlocking every time the word the adversary shows up. That's what I'm objecting. That's
fair. That's fair.
My objection.
That's
the
absolutely fair.
Book itself, and I mean, I am quite convinced that it shouldn't have been included in the Bible, but it's too late for that. I'm not trying to remove it from the Bible. Let me tell you.
Yeah. Well, my true contention is with the word in black and red is to lay the foundation so that we can actually understand what Revelation is about, instead of being so afraid of what it contains and misunderstanding it by not understanding the deep mythology and the fact that it is a work of fan fiction based off of so much of what's happened in the Bible already.
Yeah, I think that's a great reading Revelation as a culmination is fantastic. Reading Revelation in this Ouroboros way, where it actually is the real beginning.
Yeah,
That's my objection.
Absolutely.
Man, oh man, I am out of time. This has been such a pleasure. Obviously, they know where to find you. We'll put links, and so if you want more Micah, that's easy to find. Anything else you would like to say before we go?
Yeah, this has absolutely been a pleasure. I love this and love connecting with other anarchist podcasts to build the movement. If you are a person of faith and you find yourself outside of a home, please come check out The Word in Black and Red and connect with the Llama Pack. It's an alternative church for folks who are left on the outside. We joke that we're the folks who were left outside of the sheepfold, and we would love to have you. But if you take nothing else from this, and you are not a person of faith or anything like that, there are 2 billion Christians in the world. And the people who are influenced by this book are everyone in the Western tradition. And so understanding this book and understanding what the Bible is about and the ways that it can be used to undermine the lies that we are told in our society has to be essential to how we actually build a better world. So I hope that you will embrace comrades of faith, whether they're anarchists or communists or socialists or whatever else, embrace them, learn from them, offer what you have to learn as well. We actually can build a better world.
All right, that's perfect. Thank you, Micah.
Thank you, Greg.